Well, to many of you, this may not look like a very attractive part of a garden, but to us, it's one of our most productive asparagus beds. This particular bed's probably been here about 5 or 6 years, and this past year we had a bountiful harvest. And you can tell by the amount of foliage or ferns that we allowed to grow up after about 4 or 6 weeks of harvest. We just let the ferns grow up to help supply a food source for the crowns, so we'll get a great harvest again this year. And remember, asparagus was one of the earliest vegetables to start in production, and it won't be too long that those spears will start popping up. But we allowed the ferns to grow up, and we also left them on during the winter time to help provide a little bit of insulation. Now, many gardeners don't do that because they don't like the appearance of it. But again, we found that it helps insulate the crowns. Now, if you do cut them back, you need to make sure that you throw over a good 3, 4, 6 inches of mulch to help insulate them during the winter. And if you've had some disease problems with the ferns in the past, it's probably a good idea to make sure that you go ahead and cut those off so you don't reinfest them. But our beds, again, are very thick and really spreading, and we've got another bed over to my right that is really sparse. So we're going to dig up some of the crowns and we're going to separate them and try to fill in some of those other spots. And January, February, even early March is a good time to dig those up. So the first thing that you want to do is just cut off these ferns if you haven't done that. And we've already cut them off, and you just pull them back. And you can see we've got a lot of height here, a lot of swelling. Part of that is because we planted them in a little bit higher mound, but also it tells you the sizing of those crowns and how big they're getting. So the first thing we're going to do here is just dig these crowns up, and we'll show you how to separate. Well, after a little bit of digging in our heavy clay soil here, we got 2 big clumps just like this, and we cut them in half to make it a little bit easier to get out. And so you can see the extensive root system that will show up on asparagus, especially after 5 or 6 years in the ground like these. Now, the best thing to try to do, which we've done with these, is we took them over by our water faucet and got a high pressure water hose and just started washing the soil off. And it took quite a while, but we got all the soil off, and then we were able to cut them up into several pieces with a shovel. And if you've got a sharp knife, that will help too. And we received, I guess, about 5 or 6 crowns that we divided from that one big clump. And some of them don't really look like what you would see in the store that's showing up this time of year. But again, we've divided them, and if you'll just make sure that you get one of the crown points where you see some spears that have actually come up from in the past, you'll be okay. And that's what we've got here. These are actually spurs where some of the spears had come up last year, and you'll see some buds around that. And as the soil temperature warms up, you'll get a bigger bud that's called the primary, and it will come up first, and then they'll just go around that crown, and of course they get smaller as the production goes. So when you divide it, if you'll just make sure you've got at least one of those, and some of these we've got 2 because they're too woody, you'll be okay. Now you'll see things more like this in the garden centers this time of year. It's a little bit smaller with some good healthy roots on them. And if you'll watch, sometimes you can even pull those apart and divide them too. But our beds really aren't ready in the other area that we're going to renovate. So some of these we're just going to store indoors in a dry condition, about 40 degrees for the temperature. And we'll probably put ours in like vermiculite or sawdust or something to try to help keep them dry where they don't hold a lot of moisture. And then as we get our beds built up, then we'll plant them throughout the next few weeks. So you can store them and let them dry out a little bit before you plant them. But when you get your crowns, and of course this is where we dug all this out, so we're going to have to put one back in. A lot of times commercially they'll just throw them in the ground, and you want to get them at least 4 to 6 inches deep, preferably deeper if it's a sandy soil. But the way I usually like to do it is kind of mound up a little area in the center at my depth, and again this is ours is about 8 inches. Then you just lay that crown right over the top of it and Try to get your growing points up and then just mash it down there. Now, because this is such a heavy clay soil, we're going to try to put back some of our compost and things in it. But if you just put in leaves and peat moss, again, you can run into problems like you do if you plant shrubs or trees. So we've got a nice mix of it, and of course, we had to bring soil in because all of our soil stuck on the root ball there. So we're just going to cover that up. Notice that we're not putting any fertilizer or anything, just some of this good compost that we've got mixed up with some potting soil. We're going to fill that hole up, and we'll just pack it down as much as we can. And we'll still need a couple of other loads of or buckets of soil. But the thing you need to remember, we still have some possibility of getting some cold weather. So we've got some leaves here that we're gonna, once we get our soil level mounted up, we're gonna put that over about 4 inches for mulch to help insulate it. Then we're gonna water it in, and really, depending on the size of the crown, especially if you get small ones, I know it's pretty tempting, but when the spears start coming up, leave them alone at least the first couple of years, because you wanna increase the size so you'll have plenty of nutrients to get those bigger spears. If you've got a larger one, you might harvest, maybe a week or two, and then leave them alone. Once the spears start turning into ferns, then we'll probably come in with some organic nitrogen. And our soil test, again, we're not deficient in phosphorus, potassium, so that's why we didn't put anything in ahead of time. If your soil test tells you that you need P and K, it'd be great to mix that in before you put the crown in. So with a little patience, hopefully this will turn into some of these big, beautiful fronds like we've got here beside us.
We hope you enjoyed this video. It's part of our OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel. You can also find more recent videos on our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. And join us on social media for great gardening tips, photos, and discussion.